understand, you guys have been doing this theme for the year called Christ Made Visible, right? Did Cordell lie to me? No? Okay. Christ Made Visible. And it sounds like Sundays have kind of been a time where you guys have been studying out the book of Mark. And you've kind of been reading Mark and just seeing what is Christ's character? What is Jesus like? How does his character affect me in my life? And I love the Gospel of Mark. This was the first book of the Bible I ever read when I was a freshman in college years ago. And I like Mark 1 through 10 because it's kind of like this macro perspective of Jesus' ministry. It's like it's zoomed out. We got Jesus, and he's healing people. He's teaching the masses, doing all this cool stuff. And it kind of gives you the main events of Jesus' ministry. And then in chapters 11 through 16, it really focuses in, and we get this micro perspective of Jesus' ministry. And it's like, it's only a couple-day period of time, and it leads up to Jesus' death and his resurrection. And it's all the craziness that happens in Jerusalem that kind of leads up to that, right? And, lately, you guys have been in Mark chapter 12, and this is just a dense chapter, to say the least. And I don't know who here, which of you men wrestled in high school, but we kind of used to do this drill in wrestling practice where you would kind of take like one person and you'd put them in the middle of everybody, and everybody else would get in a line and they'd kind of take turns going at him. You know what I'm saying? And that person would have to stay in the middle and like take somebody down, and they'd kind of wrestle and fight. And whoever kept taking down people would get to stay in the middle. And you guys be in that situation before? I know Jimmy has been in that situation. But like, you want to be the guy who's in the middle the longest. You want to be able to take guys out. Another fresh guy comes in, you take him down. You want to see who can stay in the middle the longest. And I feel like that's kind of what Jesus is doing in Mark chapter 12. Like, you got the Pharisees coming at him. You got the Sadducees coming at him. You got all these different groups of people, all the enemies that Jesus has had, that he's made over the past few years. They're coming after him. They're taking turns getting in this line. And he just absolutely destroys them each and every time. It's epic. It's awesome. And, no worries, bro. He's doing a great job, man. No big deal. I can hold it, yeah. Yeah, I can hold it. I feel like I'm in a comedy show now. All right, well, that's a little better. You guys can hear me? Okay, good stuff. I can also yell, but we'll go with this. So that's what's going on in Mark 12. Everybody's coming after Jesus, and he's just annihilating them in front of this huge crowd, and they're just loving him. They're like, this is the Messiah. This is the guy that we've been waiting for. And then I love in Mark 12, verse 34, when it finally says, and from then on, nobody dared ask him any more questions. You know what I mean? He just showed them who was boss, showed them who he really was, so much so that finally people were like, okay, we cannot stand up to this guy like this. We cannot debate him. We cannot try and trip him up. Like, there's no way that's going to happen. And it's so cool because you think about, like Jesus, he came from some no-name town in Galilee, you know? And these were all the elite, most powerful, most educated people in all of Judea. And he's just taking them down one right after the other. In their minds, the only option that they had left was to kill him. They had to find a way to kill him. And, you know, in verses 38 through 44, Jesus makes two strong statements about the condition of people's hearts. And that's kind of what we're going to be focusing on today. That's what we're going to be studying out. And the title for the lesson today is Heart Conversations. Okay? There we go. You guys see that? Heart Conversations. It's up there. Sweet. I never know how these things work. But it's kind of like hard conversations, right? But we're talking about our hearts today. And Jesus, when he has these statements that begin in Mark chapter verse 38, he's using these statements to teach his listeners and to teach us how we ought to orient our hearts. Like, he's trying to reveal what's bad in our hearts and kind of sift that out, and what's good in our hearts and kind of raise that to the surface. I think it's important for us to see why Jesus initiated these discussions, and it's important for us to be like him and be willing to initiate these conversations amongst each other. Amen? So we're going to be talking about that. And so the first key to having heart conversations from this chapter in Mark is to be direct. Be direct. Let's read verses 38 through 40 so you guys can open up to Mark 12, starting in verse 38 there. Give you guys a second to do that. All right, starting in verse 38. As he taught, Jesus said, "Watch out for the teachers of the law. They love to walk around in these flowing robes and be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and have the most important seats in the synagogues. In the places of honor at the banquets, they devour widows' houses and for show make lengthy prayers. These men will be punished most severely." And man, you can't be more direct than Jesus is right here. I mean, he's literally saying this in front of this massive crowd with these teachers of the law present, and he's just dishing it on them, calling them out for what they are. You know, right before this, in Mark, Jesus has actually given the two greatest commandments, right? And the first one is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And what he's trying to help the people see is the teachers of the law were loving themselves with all their heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the second command is to love your neighbors as yourself. And he's trying to show these people that, hey, they're not loving their neighbors. They're actually stealing from the most vulnerable members in society. The widows were the most marginalized people in that day and age. And he's saying this in front of everybody. He's calling people. Imagine how awkward this would be, you guys. Like, imagine if somebody was doing something like this here, and somebody came up here where I'm standing and just called it out in front of all of you. Like, that would be awkward. That'd be insane. You know, I think as Christians, we can often think it's our job to be passive, to kind of let people walk all over us, to turn the other cheek, which, you know, Jesus says we got to turn the other cheek. Like, that's the right thing to do in different situations. But then there's passages like this where Jesus is so much on the offensive. He's coming at these guys. He's calling it out. You know, so much of following Jesus is standing up for what's right. It is. It's defending those who are being taken advantage of, being willing to fight even if you're going to hurt somebody's feelings, even if you're going to aggravate some people, even if you're going to rub people the wrong way. Our world is trying to force us to believe that people's feelings are the most important thing there is. Like, don't you dare do anything to trigger somebody else. Don't you do anything to hurt somebody's feelings. And I think what happens is this mindset kind of inevitably bleeds into the church. And it affects us. And we become way too worried about offending each other, about hurting each other's feelings, so much so that we're not willing to tell each other the truth. We're not willing to say the hard things, even when it's out of a place of love and care. I think we are way too worried about how the people around us perceive us, about how they view us. And I think we're unwilling to take a stand for what's right because we care a little bit too much about what the people around us think. We're unwilling to be honest with each other. Now, the thing about it is, in any family, like, honesty is very important, right? Like, you got to be direct with people in a family. And it's really important in this family that we are direct with each other, that we're honest, that we say the things that need to be said, okay? And to be honest with you guys, like, this is actually something that I really struggle with. I remember, so the guy who leads the church in Denver is this guy named Chris Zillman, okay? And I serve in the campus ministries. I lead our campus ministries in Denver. And, you know, having mentoring, discipling times with him, he found out pretty quickly that I was pretty passive aggressive when I had you know, feelings with people. He found out pretty quickly I did not like having conversations like this. I did not like being direct. And he called me out on it, you know, and he was like, if you want to become an evangelist in this church, this is something you need to grow in right now. You need to go after this next year. And so I kind of spent this whole year where I would just go and have all these talks I was supposed to have, you know? Like, I remember I would always vent to Chris, like, oh, we should be doing this in the church. We need to be going after this. And he would provide a space in our staff meetings where we could kind of voice what we thought, and I wouldn't say anything. Because I didn't want to rub people the wrong way. I knew that some of my ideas were going to cause people to have some hurt feelings. And he was like, are you kidding me? Like, I'm giving you a space to do this, and you're not speaking up because you're scared. That's not okay. And so he challenged me to start doing that. I started speaking up in our staff meetings, and I hurt some people's feelings. And you know what? I ended up becoming way closer with those people over time than I was before. Because that's typically what being direct, what hard conversations produces. And man, I tell you what, I'm so grateful for that. You know, my dad passed away a few years ago, and whenever somebody passes away, there's some drama that ensues, right? And there were some hard conversations I had to have with family members that I would not have been prepared to have otherwise. Not with these guys are great. But I mean, there's times in your life where you've got to be direct with the people around you, when the pressure's on, when things need to happen. And man, I remember that first year when I first started to do this, it's not like it just magically came easy. Like, I would get so anxious about having these discussions. I would get so worked up about saying what needed to be said to that person. And it would just create this weird stress reaction in me. I would imagine the worst possible outcome imaginable. And then you have these conversations, and typically, people just really respect you. Like, wow, you were willing to say that to me. Okay. There's definitely times where people don't react well, you know? But that's life, right? You got to get used to that. And so, man, I found that usually when you're direct with people, it creates trust between individuals. And that's really important. I have best friends now who I would not have had a few years ago because we were direct with each other, and there was friction, and we had to work through stuff, and it's funny how that can really build relationships. Are you somebody who is direct with people, or are you indirect with people? Does your fear of having these conversations keep you from having them, or are you willing to push through and say what really needs to be said? You know, I want to challenge you guys to do two things when you walk away this morning, okay? The first thing is, if you have a hard time being direct like Jesus, I want you to talk to somebody in your life who can kind of hold you accountable, right? Like maybe a mentor, a discipler, a friend, somebody who's going to be willing to kind of challenge you in this. Like, just be open with them, like, hey, I struggle with this. I need you to kind of help me go after this a little bit. And just ask them to push you, to hold you accountable. Secondly, I want everybody here to think about one person that they need to be direct with. Okay, that one person. I'm sure we all have issues in our lives. We all have friction with people, right? I want you to think of that one person. Maybe it's a coworker, a family member, maybe somebody in this room. I'm sure we can all think of a situation that we need to address with somebody. And then once you think of that person, like, come up with a plan to talk to them this week. You know, maybe do a phone call. If you can do it in person, that would be even better. But just come up with some sort of plan to have that conversation. In Ephesians chapter 4, we're not going to turn there, but there's a passage that talks about how we need to speak the truth in love to each other. Like, that is an essential part of Christianity. We got to realize that every time we're direct with each other, that is what we're building into this community. That's what we're building into this family. Every time we're being indirect with each other, we're building that too. The things we don't say, the things we don't address, like, that's the kind of culture we create in this room. And that's not healthy for any family or any community. But being direct, getting things out in the open, like, that's going to build up trust. It's going to build up, like, a standard. Like that's good for any family. Okay? We feel good about that, guys? Okay, amen. Now we're going to look at the second key to having heart conversations, all right? The second key is to lift others up, all right? If you're going to be direct with people, you also got to lift people up. You don't want to do it in a manipulative way, okay? Don't do that. But we'll talk about that, okay? Let's do Mark 12, verses 41 through 44, okay? So right under that chunk. Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put, and he watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins, worth only a few cents. And calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, This poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything she had to live on. And so Jesus here, he enters this different part of the temple, and this part of the temple is called the Court of Women, okay? This is where women could go to kind of especially worship Yahweh. And Jesus sits down, he's watching the people put in their offerings, and on the wall, you kind of have these, I don't know how to describe them. They're kind of like these trumpet-looking things, like a trumpet, you know what I mean, that kind of opens up, and you would put your offering in those trumpets. There was 6 of them against the wall, and so people would kind of get in line, and they'd go to put their offering in those little receptacles, I guess you could call them, all right? And so Jesus is watching people as they're doing that. He's just taking a load off. It's been a long day, a lot of difficult conversations, and he sees the wealthy give these large, impressive sums of money out of their wealth, out of what they have. And then he sees this poor widow put in 2 copper coins, which these are the smallest coinage in the Jewish economy in this day and age. Okay, you think of the pennies that we use, right? This is the smallest amount. And she gives 2 of them. And so the rich, they gave out of their wealth, which was at little cost to themselves, which is still great, but at little cost to themselves. But then this widow, she gave everything she had, all she had to live on in the midst of her poverty, in the midst of a vulnerable, kind of dire situation, right? And Jesus is amazed by her because the way that she gave to God, it shows, man, she's depending on God completely. She is not trusting in herself at all. She's not putting her security in anything else. She's just giving it all up to God, trusting that He's going to provide for her needs. And honestly, she kind of proves that she's wholeheartedly depending on God, which is wild. I mean, can you imagine being in that situation, doing that, when you don't know where you're going to sleep, you don't know what you're going to eat, where your next meal is going to come from? And so he lifts up her example around his closest disciples, his closest guys, hoping that they would emulate her example, that they would learn something from her. Amen? Many of the people here, obviously, you guys are all disciples, but many of the people here, you've been wholeheartedly following God in different ways for years and years. And we know that the body is made up with different people, those different people have different skill sets, different gifts, different talents. I think we need to make sure that we're like Jesus, and we need to be this way with each other. We need to kind of recognize the good in each other and lift it up for other people to see, for other people to learn from. Jesus took the time to sit in the temple, and he watched the condition of this woman's heart play out in real time. I think we need to take the time to consider the good in each other. I think it's really easy to be critical of each other, to see the bad, and be like, oh, why is this person like that? Gosh, that frustrates me. But man, being able to see the good in each other, that is a little bit harder to do. It takes more time. It takes more effort. But it's a good thing to do. We got to recognize how people serve and sacrifice for God. One of the guys, I don't know a ton of you up here in Fort Collins, okay? I'm not going to pretend like I do. But, one of the guys who is a great example of this is Jimmy Preciado. And I mean, I don't know Jimmy super well, but, he studied the Bible with my brother, and I've just kind of heard about his example from Cordell, from Mike May. And ever since he moved back up to Fort Collins from Denver, I'm just hearing about how this guy is sharing his faith, trying to help people become Christians, study the Bible with people. Him and Stephanie kind of started up this, I'm pretty sure you guys started up this YoPro ministry and just have poured their heart, their blood, their sweat into it. I mean, you got to lift people like that up. You know what I'm saying? People who are just pouring themselves out for other people. Okay, a round of applause. Sure. And you guys, I mean, in every church, you've got the AV team. You know what I'm saying? And I mean, these guys get here early. They have to prep stuff the night before, usually make all these slides. They have to deal with a minister who comes in 10 minutes before service and wants to change everything up. I'm that guy. Literally, almost every time I preach in Denver, I'm like, oh, I had this great idea. Can we add this? And they're just like, finally, my campus guy who does slides, he's like, I'm not doing that anymore. You tell me the night before or you don't tell me at all. And I'm like, dang it, okay. You got to deal with the worship team. They're always trying to add a song, take away a song. I love you guys, but you do that, okay? AV is stressful, man. You only notice those guys when they mess up. You know what I mean? Like, it's rough when they're late on the slides, when they type something wrong. If everything goes the way it should, you're not going to recognize them. You know what I mean? It's tough. We got to lift these people up. They're some of the biggest servants in our churches. And their only goal is to make this run well, to make this a great environment for us to connect with God. And that's honorable. That's commendable. Amen? It is so encouraging when we're working hard. We're trying to do something awesome for God, and the people around us recognize us for it. Obviously, that shouldn't be our primary motivation, but man, that feels good when you get that pat on the back, when somebody recognizes you for the work that you're doing. And I think ultimately it's good for us, for our hearts when we lift other people up, and it's definitely good for them, right? Everybody in this room brings a unique skill set to the table in this body. And I think by recognizing the talents in others, we actually also have an opportunity to learn from them, to help other people learn from them. In our society, like, you guys, our culture is so good at tearing people down, at just destroying people's character, making people look bad on full display for everybody to see. Man, when people walk into this room, it should be the exact opposite. You know what I'm saying? Like, we should counter that with how much we value each other, with how much we care about each other, with how much we know that our different strengths add to the whole. Would the people you're close to say that you regularly lift people up? Or do you regularly put people down? You know, honestly, I don't know if this is a guy thing or what. I kind of think it is, to be honest. But guys, like, tear each other down a lot, you know? And in some weird way, it's kind of like bonding. You, like, just destroy each other, make fun of each other, and you kind of get closer because of it. And there's definitely a time and a place for that. I think you got to have some of that banter. But man, if that's all you do, like you're not helping anybody out. Like, you need to counter that by lifting people up. Let's all be people that lift each other up. Amen? Okay. I want you to think of one person this week to lift up. All right, just write it down in your notes, put it in your phone. Lift that person up this week. Don't forget to do it. Maybe you can just knock it out right after church today. You know, just get it out of the way. Get yourself in that habit. Heart conversations are what we've been talking about today. They're a huge, important part of our Christianity. You know, kind of like we've been talking about today, that the society we're in, it's so good at deflecting, not getting to the heart. Like we need to be like Jesus and address the heart. Talk about the heart. Care about the heart. Jesus was never afraid to open up discussions that illuminated where people's hearts were at. And he was never willing to, he was never shying away from getting them to a better place in their heart. In Mark 12, we saw Jesus do this by being direct and by lifting up this widow who was a great example. Let's be like our King and have these heart conversations. Amen?